Welcome back to another episode of Ranching Reboot, the podcast where we dive deep into the world of regenerative agriculture, sustainable ranching, and the innovative ideas that are reshaping the future of farming. I'm your host, Brian Alexander, and today we have a fascinating conversation lined up for you with our guest this week, Austin Blendon. Austin, hailing from Kay County, Oklahoma, is a dedicated rancher who has embraced the principles of regenerative agriculture to revitalize his land and strengthen his community. In this episode, we delve into Austin's journey from growing up on the family farm, navigating the challenges of leased land, to building a successful grass-fed beef operation. Together, we discuss the nuances of custom cattle grazing, the importance of maintaining land health, and how the landscape of agriculture is continually evolving. We dive into Austin's unique experiences with wind turbines on his property, his approach to multi-species grazing, and his insights on the future of small-scale, community-focused farming. Whether you're a seasoned rancher, an aspiring farmer, or just someone interested in the future of food production, this episode is packed with insights and stories you don't want to miss. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for your Monday morning meeting. Austin, thanks for joining me. How are you today, buddy?
I'm good. How are you?
Oh, I'm just fantastic. I'm about ready for this warm weather to end. I don't know about you.
I'm over it.
Yeah, it was so last Saturday, Medicine Lodge, my hometown, set the record for the state of Kansas. Beat the all-time record for high temperature for that day. I think we had like 114.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't home. My wife wanted to go to the air show up in Wichita on Saturday. It wasn't cooler up there. It didn't feel cooler at the airport. Man, I think it was like 105, and we were there for almost 5 hours at the airport.
Probably on concrete and
Yeah.
asphalt too, huh?
Yes, nice kind of bright white concrete. So normally I wear a ball cap, right?
Yeah.
I've got a big floppy sun hat that I wear when it's not too windy. I don't wear cowboy hats because a lot of time it's just too dang windy and I have a hard time keeping this image on my head. So it's like, okay, it's more important. I'll just wear the chin strap. I'll keep the thing on. And the sun was so bad reflecting off that concrete that my nose and cheeks got sunburned under my frickin' hat.
Yeah. That's awful.
But anyway, I'm glad summer's coming to an end. How's the grazing season been for you?
Been good. It's been a huge blessing. Better than last year. Haven't got the cows moved how I would have liked, but yeah, we got rain early on and there's grass. I've got pasture to move them to once I get some fence built. And right now I've got 40 acres of sorghum Sudan grass, sunflower, and cowpeas that came up real good that kind of got everything locked down on. I have we had 40 acres that had been leased out, conventionally farmed, and I took that back this past fall. I broadcasted some seed into it and some rye and another forage. I can't think of the name of it. It didn't really come up. So I paid a neighbor to disc it, and we planted that combination of sunflower, cowpea, and sorghum Sudan grass into it. And it's come up good. So my intention there is to have enough forage to get the cattle to stay up there long enough to get animal impact, get manure. It was very nitrogen deficient. And I'd say I'm opposed to using chemical fertilizers. Not saying I wouldn't if that was what was absolutely warranted to get some production, but I just don't want it to be my first thing I do, the first thing on my head, the first tool out of my toolbox. So I'm hoping getting the cattle locked up there and getting some urine and and manure on the ground will be enough to maybe add some nitrogen. We'll see.
Okay. Before we dive in too terribly deep, why don't we back up a little bit and talk about Austin a little bit? So tell us about who you are, where you're from, and like just kind of give us a jumping off point.
Cool. Well, I'm Austin Blendon. I'm from K County, Oklahoma, which is in the center of the state, a little bit to the east. We're in the eastern part of K County, and it is in the southwest region of the Flint Hills, which is the last remaining part of the tallgrass prairie. And where we're at, we're along the Arkansas River, Call Lake area, which was dammed up back in the 60s. Really grown up, and we've been fighting to, I've been fighting to get that woody growth vegetation fought back and preserve our little corner of what's left of the tallgrass prairie. I do, we're on the spectrum pursuing regenerative agriculture, regenerative grazing, kind of in a holistic manner. Rotate the cows. For years, I've rotated from one pasture to the other. At times, I've managed to overgraze everything, and hope I'm kind of starting to figure it out now and leave everything better than I found it. So I grew up on the family farm. We got it in the land run. My family got it in the land run back in 1893, proved it up.
Okay.
And then through conventional farming and ranching, when my great uncle died in 1994, everything besides the land got sold at a sheriff's auction. And my grandparents, who ended up with the land, they had moved off the farm. Like so many people thought farming was awful way to make a living. And I really had to fight to stay on the land and to keep it operating. And so that's what I've been able to do. And sticking with more about me now. So I do grass-fed beef. My goal has been to be able to direct market my entire calf crop. So started out right now, I would still kind of describe myself as a stalker to direct market grass-fed, grass-finished program, heavy on the grass-finished. And the way I found to do that that's worked best for me is through farmers markets. So I sell beef every Saturday, the Tulsa, Oklahoma farmers market, the Broken Arrow farmers market in Oklahoma, and then the Oklahoma City Scissortail Park farmers market. So those are the three largest farmers markets in the state. Each market, each weekend could see anywhere from 3,000 to 7,000 people. So yeah, that's where I'm at. That's a short synopsis, and I can go into details on any facet of all that.
Okay. Well, what's your story like from high school to now? How did you get involved in agriculture?
Just growing up on the ranch at a time when it was leased out. I said my grandparents moved off the farm, and then we lived in a rent house that we rented from my grandfolks growing up, and the land was leased out. I grew up with just this desire to have contact and relationship with the land and the animals that I didn't get to have because it was leased out. And the people that leased it out, they came and went like they owned it. I was even kept out of 4-H as a child because the people that leased our farm ground, his wife ran the local 4-H. And what she told my mom was 4-H is full, no room for me in it. And I never thought anything about that till I got older and realized that all these FFA and 4-H programs they want everybody,
Right.
And so got into high school and worked for a couple of friends and neighbors that had farms and ranches, worked at a grain elevator, worked for a rancher and vet that owned a sale barn, learned just every aspect of agriculture. Went to college, ran tracks in college, was going to pursue like a ranch management degree. Had wanted to go to like a Texas A&M Ranch Management Institute or some program like that. Um, my grades weren't where they needed to be. Um, and I had a chance. I started day working on some different ranches and cowboying and found a different path towards farming and ranching. When I was on the track and field team, every day is fully consumed with athletics. But I looked around at all these people on my team. No one knew what they wanted to do with their life. Everyone was consumed with athletics, which was my first love. But I slowly realized I know what I want to do. I want to ranch, and I see a path forward towards it. All my friends that I graduated high school with already had jobs, were working, and I just kind of coming from a rural background, knew that's where I needed to be. I needed to have a job, and I needed to be working and moving towards my career. So started working on a ranch in the Osage in the Flint Hills, about full time, lived out there. Um, and then went back to college for a little while, did some livestock animal judging, saw that aspect of it, was not great at that, but had a lot of fun and learned a lot. And then just kept ranching through, to be clear, how I got into ranching. I leased my first pastures, 330 acres, got in the High Plains Journal in the wanted ads, pasture wanted ads, and took in 120 heifers to cab out. And basically lived in a camper on this lease pasture. Want to cab these heifers out in a pasture full of brush on the side of a Flint Hill next to Call Lake. And, I think my first deal, my first taking cattle deal, calved them out 100%. Everything went great, had records. The guy paid me throughout it. And then when we loaded the cattle up, and I'm 21 at the time, he said, "Oh, I don't have my checkbook. I'll mail you a check for that last amount that I was owed." Never saw that check, and called the guy, and he's like, "Well, I guess you'll have to take me to court." And he knew full well I was a guy that didn't have any backing, and a young guy, and so took my licks like that several times, taking in cattle, and but I never gave up. I knew it's what I wanted to do, and pursued, kept my leases, lost my total acreage a couple times. I've failed a couple times before I figured out how to quit doing take-in cattle, quit doing custom care. That was a losing venture for me. Not saying it's a losing venture for everyone, but it was for me. And maybe one day get back into that a little bit. But got my own cow herd built up, and was eventually able to get into these. I started direct marketing beef, kind of figuring it out, wholes and halves, and post on Facebook, call people up. "Hey, I got this. You want some beef?" And never really took off until I got into the farmers markets.
Okay. I, I'm curious about some of your custom cow wrecks and why you've decided to get away from that. Because for a lot of us, if you can find the right kind of client for
Hmm.
custom grazing and taking cows, it can be a really good long-term deal. Like I like to say, it's a
Yeah.
good solid second base hit every year. Yeah, you're not going to knock one out of the park. You're not going to have a huge windfall like some guys can at the sale barn once every 10 years, but you're guaranteed income every single year.
Hmm. Yeah. 100% finding the right partner. I'd encourage anyone to do custom cattle care as a way to get started if they find the right partner. And I don't discourage anyone from just getting out and trying, because that's how you learn. But
I, I,
what I
I do want to go back to the point where, like, you got started in a rented pasture with custom cows living in a camper.
yeah,
So for those of you out there saying, I can't do that, you're wrong.
yeah, yeah, it just uh perseverance, and being hard headed, another way to say that. But yeah. And I'll be honest, if you're a guy that's looking to the expense of cattle, if you're a guy that's looking to send cattle out, you got to look at where you're sending them. And if the place you're sending them, the person taking care of them doesn't own the land, is in a camper, doesn't have much behind them, you got to look at how your risk is secured. And so me being a young guy and not having much behind me, I fully recognize that's an issue too. So, but again, it all comes down to your relationship. You meet the people, they meet you, and ultimately it's your character and the character of the person who owns the cattle and the relationship you build that determines if it's going to be a successful venture.
And oftentimes you're going to take somebody, like for me, it's kind of nerve wracking when I get a new client or when I have to, fire a client and get a new one.
Mm-hmm.
Is okay, I'm going to take care of 200 head of your cattle, which could be worth, a $500,000 or better.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to give me a small check at the end of the year. The only security in that business that you have is you have the cows. And like you
Mm-hmm.
said, the example you kind of had a few minutes ago, guy said, "Oh, I don't have my checkbook. I'll pay you, and I'll send you a check later." Uh,
Mm-hmm.
there's got to be an awful lot of trust for me to let
Yeah.
him load up his cows and take them with still an outstanding balance.
Yeah, exactly. And that was the learning curve, when I was a young guy doing this by myself. Uh, I didn't know that yet. And I took people at their word and I've had great customers too. Um, ultimately, like I think, are any of your taking cattle, Coriani or smaller frame cattle or what you would describe as efficient cattle?
Yes, but that's only because two of my clients bought some of my cows each.
Cool.
The herd that I'm running over on the west side for my partner Nate, we've been doing business together since like 2006.
Mm-hmm.
And he's trying for a smaller, more maternal, more forage efficient cow. He's got his cows down about 1,100 pounds, and they're good cows. And I've been taking them in, on and off for the last 15 years. But he called me in, I think it was February or March, and he said, "How do you feel about doing a bunch of yearling heifers?" Suits me just fine. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's when you're in a custom grazing business, it's kind of an interchangeable grazing unit. It's pounds of beef, it's numbers of units, right?
Right.
And yeah, you gotta kind of pay attention to am I going to be growing feeder heifers, replacement heifers, feeder steers, or fall calves or spring calves? You kind of got to understand a little bit about the nutritional needs, but it's not that big of a deal, I don't think.
Right.
Um, so we brought in these yearling heifers. They're doing really well, rotating them around. He was actually out there moving those this morning while I had to go move the other two bunches. But so on the south end, client been with me since 2019. Um, he bought some of my stock out of a sale barn through an order buyer. His order buyer was sent to look for party girls, and he ended up buying, I think, 13 from me. My other partner, Brendan Wheelock, we're on our third year together. He's he bought a bunch of my steers last year. He bought a bunch of my heifers. So there's probably 25 or 30 cows that I
Mm-hmm.
raised running around in that group too. So, and what Tim and Brendan both did is they did something I really appreciate. They left my tags in them.
Yeah.
So I could go out there and I could pick them out. Like I see
Mm-hmm.
that orange tag in the left ear or and then I see the tag and then the button. Like I instantly know that that's one of mine. So yeah, we do have some lower input, smaller frame type genetics running around out here. And I will say this about, all my clients, they're all trying to drift that way toward the smaller, more forage efficient cattle because
Mm-hmm.
everybody's seeing the input cost. Everybody's seeing the
Yeah.
input cost. Everybody's seeing the marketing. Everybody's seeing the concentration in the market, what's going on. And I hope that there's enough
Where
people.
is the concentration in the market when you say that?
Oh, with the Packers.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and So last week's episode was with Corbett Wall. Did you catch that one?
No, I haven't, but I watch him every morning and have since like 2019.
Hey, you gotta, when we get done with this, if you have some time, you ought to go check out 181, which will be the episode right before this with Corbett Wall. And we kind of take a deep dive into some markets.
Uh huh.
I kind of wish he would have got maybe a little bit more wild, a little bit more I- off the chain with, it. I tried to just kind of wind him up and let him go. And there were a couple times where I was kind of like, man, I wish you would have taken this a couple more steps, but that's okay.
Hmm.
Uh, but the market concentration of the Packers and how they have the markets rigged with, so little of the market being traded on a cash basis and that tiny little sliver setting the basis for all the grids and formulas. Like, I really appreciate what you're doing, trying to market everything through farmers markets or local sales channels.
Hmm.
And the more I think about it and the future of beef in this country, I think we're going to need a lot more producers like you, especially if the national cow herd continues to shrink.
Hmm.
So as the cow herd continues to shrink, well, feeders are just going to feed them a little heavier to make up for the
Hmm.
lower numbers. Because at the end of the day, it's like in the custom grazing business. Okay. I've got pounds of grass. I need pounds of beef to eat them.
Well, and they'll import more as well because a lot
Yes.
of that feeding longer ends up being extra fat that's going to get blended with the lean import beef. And our Corbett was saying yesterday on an episode of his that I watched, I think Uruguay
Yep.
uh, imports are up 105%, 95 or 105%. So
And
feeding our beef longer also equates to importing more beef, I would say.
right. Because as we're feeding these animals longer in a feedlot, they are building more, quote, marbling intramuscular fat, and they're building more fat covering. They're not necessarily building more volume of meat at past a certain point. So I, I think that's totally valid, Austin, is we're growing bigger cattle that have more lower value fat on them that the packer can trim off, take that fat and go throw it in the mixer with everything coming in from overseas, as Corbett calls it, brush fed.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate that distinction between, calling them brush fed, scrub fed. Okay, I
Yeah.
think that's a good term because it does differentiate, a product, that product, which is okay, grass fed, from a product like yours, which is
Hmm.
intensively managed, grass fed, grass finished.
Right. Yeah. Every time I hear that term scrub fed or brush fed, the hair on the back of my neck kind of stands up because I'm thinking one of these days she's gonna say grass fed but it's like you said, you appreciate that distinction. That term he's using, scrub fed, brush fed, isn't interchangeable with grass fed or grass finished.
Yeah. Yep. And that's got to be what's happening. I mean, I wonder what the ratio is between how much trim comes off one of our feedlot animals and how many animals that gets mixed in with to make like an 80-20 product. Like how many imported animals that would get mixed with.
Mm.
'Cause that's
Yeah.
that's one of those statistics that'd be really, really hard to find because I don't think
Yeah.
they'd want you to know.
You'd have to talk to someone that's in that production line doing the work and pick their brain.
Yeah. Yeah.
No stats are kept on that, I bet.
But so I guess here's the rest of that thought. You know, as the cow herd kind of continues to draw down, and I think that the national cow herd, like, decreasing, I think we're like 56, 57 million head, something like that, and falling. I don't One of the things I was trying to get out in the conversation with Corbett is what kind of market conditions do we need to see for guys to start retaining heifers to start rebuilding the cow herd? And
Mm.
I don't know what that market's going to look like, but it seems like we're being driven toward a direction of having, like, the industry, the packers want us to have fewer animals that they control and that they can feed to a heavier weight to compensate for the lower head count.
Hmm. For sure.
So here's a good question for you. What is finished? When you say grass finished or feedlot finished, what does that mean?
Here's how I describe that to my customers, because that's a question I get a lot. Uh, Originally, I think the term grass fed meant grass finished. Fed cattle, as we know the term, cattle on feed, fed cattle means cattle in the feedlot or cattle in their last stage of life. In 2012, 2013, when I started becoming more aware of and heavily involved in the grass fed sector, uh, grass fed meant grass fed. Uh, it wasn't until later that you started hearing the distinction grass finished. As I got into the farmers markets and started having a relation, seeing other producers that were calling their product grass fed or grass fed, but grain finished. I was like, come on now.
All cows
Uh,
eat grass.
yeah. And that was their argument. Well, my cows eat grass, so they're grass fed, but they're grain finished. I'm like, well, that's not anything different than typical meat you get anywhere. Then I kind of changed my distinction to grass finished. And what I mean by that, I think and the statistics that I've seen is the real difference comes from that last 90 to 120 days of what the fat profile and the protein profile is made up of in that last stage of life before they go to the butcher. So finishing really, it's all my cattle now. I'm getting to where I'm butchering our calf crop. So everything's 100% grass fed, grass finished. But then the stalker sector, coming in, and maybe they've had cake at weaning or whatever. But yeah, finishing refers to that last segment of life that they really put the finishing touches on the meat characteristics, what feed that's based off of.
Okay. I think it was Anibal. I'm going to screw up the name. Portomingo from Argentina. He always said that it was very critical to maintain 2 pounds of gain during that last 90 days. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
really, to maintain to have peak quality in your grass fed meat, you got to make it's supposed to gain 2 pounds a day.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know about you down there in the south end of the Flint Hills, but here in the Red Hills, we struggle sometimes to get a pound in it. I mean, just
Really?
the environment and the grass. Well, we don't, I don't burn near as often as you do either. Well, as often as most of the Flint Hills does.
Mm-hmm.
But we can get some really good gains if we're running on burned grass,
Mm-hmm.
just like they can in the Flint Hills. But we can't get that done every year. So for me, it seemed like there was only about 3 months out of the year, maybe even 45 to 60 days that I could look at animals and say, this is where they've got the peak fat covering. This is where they're the peak size. The forage is about ready to start decreasing in quality, and they're going to start using their stored fat to live off over the winter. So right now is going to be my harvest window, which is kind of like September, like
Mm-hmm.
the end of August into September is where I figured my harvest window would be for grass, quote, finished animals.
Mm-hmm.
Because I guess that's the definition of finished that we've all kind of landed on, is when the animal has the peak fat covering that it's going to have through that feed cycle.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Pasture animal, it's going to be toward the end of the growing season before the grass
Right.
goes dormant, because they've had all spring and all summer to pack on pounds, as many as they can. The grass starts to dry, lignify, get tougher. Weeds aren't quite as growing. So they're going to go into conservation mode. and they're going to have to live off some of that stored fat over the winter. But when we put them into a feedlot type scenario, or we feed our cows over the winter, we pull them out of the pasture and we feed them, ration over the winter because they gotta maintain weight. I understand that. I understand why people think they have to maintain the weight on their cattle through the winter. That's also really expensive.
Right.
Um, but then anyway, so feedlot, when they say an animal in a feedlot is finished, that's a different kind of finished than just thinking about peak fat covering and peak condition of the animal, I
Oh
think.
yeah. Right.
I think when they're saying finished in the context of a feedlot animal, the animal is physically finished. And by finished, I mean its organs are finished. Its organs are like, if they keep feeding that animal another 30 days, it might not be alive because of organ failure.
Right. When it's time to butcher it, it's time to butcher it because it's not going to be able to live any longer. The way it is with pigs, I'm told, when they're done, they got to go.
I, I don't know anything about pigs. The only thing I know about pigs is when I was in high school in the mid late 90s, I worked for a neighboring farmer who still farms in this area, grows seed wheat. Um, but they had hogs. So, and that I worked for him for 3 years. The first year I worked there, one of my jobs was to clean the farrowing house.
Hmm.
And that almost made me quit eating bacon for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
The second year I worked for them was the year the hog market got completely destroyed and they got out of hogs totally. And the next year, the hog barn was completely empty.
Wow.
Yeah. If you will, pigs are kind of nasty, period. I mean, even pasture pigs are kind of a little bit gross.
Sure.
Uh, Pigs in a
They're
barn.
dirty.
Oh, go tour a hog confinement barn. It'll make you want to quit eating bacon, guys, or don't.
Yeah. Yeah. I've had a little bit of interface with pastured pig operations and neighboring vendors at the market that sell pork, pastured pork, great product. I love it. But I've been so amazed that when customers come up or I tell them about, hey, you can go down here and get some great pork, they say, oh, I don't eat pork. So many people I hear say, I don't eat pork. And I'm like, I mean, I'm a beef guy 100%, but I'm like, what's better than bacon? And a great pork chop, which I haven't had store-bought pork forever, but a great pastured pork chop. It's got some good fat on it. That eating experience, I'd put it up against the great ribeye almost every time. And so you hear people say, oh, I don't eat pork. And you know, it is directly and a direct effect from what the industrial confined pork feeding industry has done to their product. And that's something we got to pay attention to with beef. I don't think it's going to go that way because, there's so much emphasis on marbling, but that's something we got to pay attention to not let happen is let the big guys determine what beef tastes like to the American consumer.
Okay, that's a good point, and that can lead into kind of a meat quality discussion.
Hmm.
So, I guess a side check. You ever done any chickens? You ever raised any chickens?
No,
You eat chicken?
no, no.
Okay, that's cool. So,
I've started eating eggs. I got three cartons of eggs sitting on my counter over there. That's really helping me with the variety in my diet.
okay, so my wife likes to keep chickens, so we've had
Yeah.
chickens around forever, and we've butchered some, put them in the freezer. Just some. I wouldn't even say what breed they are because they're just yard chickens. They're like probably a four-way yard bird cross
Hmm.
that eat bugs and cheap feed from the feed store. It's not bad. It's edible chicken. It's not bad. This year, we decided that she decided that we were gonna like have better chickens. So
Mhm.
we got we started with 50 Cornish crosses, and I went and got feed from our friends up at Jayco Farm up by Hutch. So it's like
I have a customer here that buys in Ponca City that buys beef from Jayco.
there must be a reason why there must be a reason why they're selling feed all the way down to Ponca. But I mean, they get a lot of their grains from my friends Kelly and Deanna at Guardian Grains up in North Dakota.
Mhm.
So I know what Jayco's putting in their feed is good stuff. So anyway, I built this chicken tractor. We end up losing 3 birds. We put 47 of them in the freezer. We had
Wow.
some last night, and I mean, it's some of the best chicken I've ever had. And there is a definite taste difference. Now, I'm not saying that, you know, maybe if we raised another breed of chicken on the same feed, the meat might taste similar, but there's always a taste. Like there's a taste that lingers in the meat of what that animal ate for 90
Mhm.
days before it was processed.
Mhm.
I and I don't think that anybody will ever be able to convince me that that's not true. There's some of the cattle that I've harvested, like when I take the meat out of the package and I'm defrosting it or cooking it in the pan, I'm smelling the grass. Like I'm smelling the
Yeah.
grass. I'm smelling the forage in the pasture. Like
Mhm.
I I don't know how to describe it other than I smell, the smells that come into your nose generate a movie in my head of that animal out grazing the grasses in that pasture.
Hey man, that's awesome. That's what it ought to do. I call that earthy. A lot of people refer to that. Oh well, it's a little. People that aren't in the know will say grass fed beef's a little gamier, and that's not correct. It's not gamey, but it's earthy, and it depends on the earth from where it came from.
I I I understand why people would say gamey because
Mhm.
they would be comparing, say, store-bought meat in the 80s or 90s to deer that somebody went out and shot.
Right.
Okay? And this is another one of my things about deer hunters and corn feeders 100 yards away from a deer blind. I'm sorry, guys. If you love deer hunting and you want to send me hate mail about this, I really don't care. This is a hill I will die on. If you put a corn feeder 100 yards away from your tree stand,
Mhm.
that's not hunting. That is baiting and shooting.
Yeah.
I mean, what I would really dearly love to see somebody come out and how I would love to see somebody hunt, bring a non compound bow, bring a straight recurve, whatever, no cams, no gears, no bullshit, straight up stick bow, one string, and go spot and stock.
Yeah.
That's what I want to see. I think that'd be
Yeah.
damn impressive.
Yeah.
But
Wh-
somebody comes to me and even wants to offer, 5, 6, $8 an acre, be like, oh, we're going to put up these deer stands and blinds and we're going to have all these corn feeders. I'll probably tell you to go down the road. So anyway, wild game got a reputation for being gamey, and now we feed all this corn to it, and it started to
Mhm.
kind of lose some of its reputation for being quote gamey
Yeah.
because I don't know about where you're at down there in Oklahoma. Here, these guys will haul corn out almost 365 days a year. It's just
Yeah.
absurd the amount of corn that people put out for deer.
Wow.
Anyway, I think that feedlot, feedlot beef, grocery store beef, and even the pork and even the chicken, yes, it all tastes the same. Why does it all taste the same? Because there's one breed of pig, there's one breed of chicken, and there's
Essentially
basically
one breed of cow too.
essentially one dominant breed of cow. I mean, most of the meat that goes through our beef plants has some sort of Angus genetic lineage in it.
Mhm.
Okay, that's fine. When you feed the same thing, when you feed the same genetics, the same diet, yeah, it's all going to taste the same, which is why McDonald's can offer a double quarter pounder in Southern California in Bangor, Maine, and it tastes the damn same.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
I don't think things should taste the same.
No.
I think we should have flavor of place and regional flavors. And this was this kind of came up last week when I was getting ready to talk to Corbett Wall, and I wasn't real sure how to frame the question, but the conversation was, in the future, are we just going to see, the current feedlot and big four packer system? Are they going to be mainly supplying restaurants, grocery stores, and fast food, and the rest of us take care? And then small marketers are taking care of the rest of the demand and maybe getting into some grocery stores.
Mm-hmm.
And I can kind of see that. I mean, I don't think that there's much potential for somebody getting into agriculture trying to compete and bootstrap an operation in the commodity production side. I just don't think that's possible.
Mm-hmm. What was his response about restaurants to your question about the big four providing the restaurants?
We really didn't get into that part of it.
Yeah.
Like I said, I couldn't really figure out a way to get that into the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Can we take a quick break?
Sure.
I got to pee real quick. We'll be right back.
Right on.
You'd think one of these days I'd maybe learn how to not drink so much coffee before podcast. So we're talking about meat quality and feeding.
Yeah.
What age do you butcher your calf crop? When's your butcher window? And what are your genetics?
Under 5 years of age, and when they're ready. My genetics are, I'm building the right type of cow for my ranch. We were both in the Johann Zeitzman WhatsApp group. You may still be, I'm not anymore. But
I'm still in there. That group has a tendency to move. I don't know if it moves or just recycles every so often, but
yeah,
it kind of gets so repetitive with new people asking the same questions.
Oh yeah, for sure. I couldn't figure something out on my phone to where every picture someone dropped in that WhatsApp group saved to my camera roll.
Yep.
And it just got to be too much.
Thousands and thousands.
But man, I about retired from cattle breeding because I had a bull. I was looking for a Murray Gray bull because I heard that they could do, Wagyu like marbling, and that they were efficient and everything. And I just wasn't finding the bull I wanted, but I found a guy that had a half Charolais, half low-line Aberdeen Angus bull. And I loved the way he looked. He looked like a Murray Gray, if you can imagine that cross. And I bought him and started breeding him to my Coriani cows. And I shared a picture of that bull in that group, and Johann Zeitzman commented back, I could not picture a better specimen of a bull. I was just like, I'm done.
Okay. That's a pretty good stamp of approval.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's the type of bull I started with. I have a Pharaoh bull, Black Angus. I think he probably has there's a heat tolerant bull that Pharaoh kind of uses in his genetics, Tarentaise. I think this bull has a little Tarentaise, and I bought him from someone else, not directly from Pharaoh, so I don't know for sure. And then I have a really great bull I'm excited about that's a red South bull. And so those are the three bulls I have on my Coriani cows and my Coriani calves. I haven't sold any heifers in 3 years. I've been saving all my heifers back. So, yeah, those are my genetics. A lot of the stockers that I buy and sell are roped out Coriani steers. And that's something I'm really excited for other ranchers that don't know to hear, because I think we've been lied to about the effect that genetics has on meat quality. or we've at least been lied to about the meat quality of the Corriente. Because I mean, I knew they had good beef for a while. I've seen different sparks of great characteristics in the beef that I've produced. The best far and away ribeye and different sections came from a 5-year-old Corriente cow that showed up in my pens one day when I gathered everything. And I had a friend there that had some experience in cattle and butchering. And this cow was just sloppy fast. Had the big fat brisket, looked like a volleyball going down her neck. Had the, bouncy fat around her tail head. Couldn't see her ribs. And my buddy said, "Austin, that cow's never had a calf." And looked, and sure enough, her bag was uptight. Didn't look. He said, "Look at her vulva," And so, yeah, so I pred checked her, and sure enough, she was open. I took her to the butcher. Now, this was towards the end of July of 22.
Okay.
It was pretty droughty, and all the grass in my pasture was just dry, dusty grass. And I've had a sneaking suspicion for a lot of years that it's more important to keep a cow's stomach full than it is the type of forage or the protein in the forage that they're getting. If they have a healthy rumen, they can break that down and they make their own protein. Now, how much protein do they make? Is it enough that they're putting on fat and whatnot? I don't know. I'm not, I don't know the science on it, and I'm not coming from any breed, registry saying what's better. I'm just going off what I've seen. And for the last 3 years, I've butchered over 120 head and sold every cut of meat to a person in front of me. And I don't think there's a better way to see your product or to get feedback from the people that are eating your product than that. And what I figured out that a straight Corriente cow can get fat and make choice ribeyes, high choice ribeyes in the middle of the summer off dry grass. It just made me think something's up here. So not up with what I'm doing. Something's up with what I grew up thinking we were supposed to do, what I hear everyone else say we got to do, what I read in the magazines that we got to do. And I think most of the time, I see people talking about, oh, this breed's got great meat characteristics. This breed has it. I'm like, no, I think it's just about what's in front of them, what's in their stomach, and how long you leave them out there. Now, a straight Charolais cow or a straight Belgian blue cow versus a red Angus or a Corriente, everything else being equal, yeah, sure, I think you'll see some difference. But, and the other thing, let me know if we're getting too far off track, but I'm kind of going down the line on meat quality here.
Oh, keep going.
Is what we think about what finished is. You asked me that earlier. And what I was taught in livestock judging that they needed to look like, they don't got to look like that to produce good beef. I'm going to say leaner. I've killed a lot lighter cattle than, cattle that I would have liked to have left out on grass for a lot longer, but I needed beef. I know what my customer wants. And it, I knew that lean beef was better than no beef that week at the market. And so I go and pick it up and I'm like, hey, that's pretty well marbled. And you could still see their hip bones, their points, but they were well rounded, looked like a baseball rather than a pencil sticking out. They were smooth over their rib cage, had a little bit of a brisket started, probably didn't have any fat deposit around the tailhead. And I'd say we're still breaking into choice on ribeyes off straight Corriente and Corriente cross steers and heifers. So that just really changed my mind and the game in front of me. And so when people are feeding in the feedlot, I mean, there's a lot of cattle coming off grass in the Flint Hills and where you're at that are probably ready for the beef market. Just a second. Let me figure out how to call come in. There's a lot of cattle coming off grass this time of year. They're probably ready, would make good beef, but they're going to go to the feedlot and be fed grain and feed and a ration for the next 120 days to get up to, I don't know, what is it, 1,400, 1,600 pounds?
Yeah, because those extra 600 pounds are worth a lot of money
Yeah,
versus the cost of the feeding.
right, right. And I'm not saying it's wrong or right. I'm just saying that yeah, I just don't think it's as based on genetics as what we've been told to be. You know, that Angus, good quality Angus cattle is going to get top price, and everything else is crap. That's not what I found to be true.
Okay. Talk about you talked about show judging and that you realized what you were looking for there didn't really have much desirability for an animal that works in the pasture or for an animal that's productive. Can you talk about that?
Mhm. I mean, you know, I discovered that years after. Um, Ask me that question a different way. I don't know if I'm following.
Talk about like show judging and what they're looking for in the show judging ring
Yeah,
with cattle and why that might not be the best things for a cattleman or somebody that's actually trying to make a
for
living in the
sure.
cattle business, why those aren't necessarily
Yeah.
desirable traits.
Well, and I don't know what livestock judging might have looked like uh, 50 years ago, but definitely what they're telling you to look for: the fat deposit around the tailhead, the basketball or volleyball uh, in the brisket. You know, going down when you look at them straight on, it looks like it could be a basketball or a volleyball. Um, all the cover and fat deposition. What you're looking for is an animal that's standing in a pen at a feed yard. Um, you're not going to have cattle typically like that standing in your pasture. And looking for that animal, looking for those characteristics on that animal in our pasture on a grass fed operation leads you and me, the grass fed producer, to say, well, grass just isn't green enough, long enough for me to produce that. No, it's not. But can you produce if you take an animal that framed out, has all its frame, and then you put it on your grass for 90 days, can you get that animal to where it's ready to make beef and good beef for somebody? Yeah, you can. And the cattle industry started on people finishing cattle on grass in our area, you know, from Osage County, Oklahoma to where you're at, up through the Flint Hills in central Kansas. And that 100 years ago, 100 plus, 150 now, that's where the cattle industry started. And that was all based on the people say, oh, yeah, well, what? Do you think we developed beef as our favorite? Humanity loves beef. I mean, I'd say that's the number one favorite. We probably eat more chicken and goat worldwide, but everyone's favorite's a big ribeye. The cattle industry in America started on grass finished beef, and it was finished in the Cherokee Strip in Oklahoma, Kansas, Flint Hills, because there was demand for it back east, Chicago, St. Louis, New York, and that's where the cattle industry all started. Beef didn't just start tasting good 50 years ago, and you know this, but also, yeah, they can get fat on grass. I'm not saying they can't, but we don't need to be thinking we got to get them looking like a feedlot steer on our pasture to have a product that people want.
I, and I would definitely agree with that. That there needs to be some distinction in what a grass fed producer is looking for versus what that animal should look like going to a feedlot.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you know, as you were talking, I was thinking about a few things. I was thinking about cattle drives. So I've kind of like got pretty interested in the actual routes that some of the cattle drives took. Just
Mhm.
because I want to know, like, were there certain areas they avoided because of terrain? Were there reasons why they went here versus there? I kind of want to understand that.
Comanches.
Mostly, yeah. Mostly it's going to be because of the Comanches. And I was thinking, okay, and the Chisholm Trail is on my mind because I was down in Canyon, Texas a couple weeks ago, visited the JA Ranch.
Mhm.
Okay, so Chisholm Trail is kind of on my mind. I'm thinking, well, they've got routes going to the west of here, going to the east of here. So I'm going to look into that a little bit more. And the more I think about that, those guys would gather cattle down in Texas and Oklahoma and drive them north to the railheads, Abilene, Dodge City, Kansas City, whatever, up here in Kansas.
Mhm.
And those cattle, they'd travel 25, 30 miles a day on the cattle drive. And those cattle would gain 2 pounds a head a day on the
Yeah.
move.
Yeah.
And now we've got such awesome cattle genetics and such wonderful cattle feeding knowledge and knowledge of animal nutrition that we can park them in a feedlot and they can stand ankle deep in their own manure and urine
Mhm.
and gain 2.5 pounds a day. And we call this progress. I mean,
Mhm.
okay, there's some allegedly that'll gain 3, 4 pounds a day, whatever. Have we really made that much progress?
Right.
And I also would think that, okay, so that's still mass market beef that's coming up on those cattle drives and going to Omaha,
Mhm.
Kansas City, Abilene, getting on the train and going east to the slaughterhouses in the east.
Mhm.
That was still a monopolized, kind of controlled market. And I wonder, like, where do the people in Dodge City get their beef in
Mm.
1880, 1890? I mean, they just went out back, cut the head off one, strung it up, and processed it there in the backyard,
Yeah.
maybe. So I don't know. I was just thinking about that. Just thinking about, how would folks 100 years ago, how would your typical rural beef consumer, where would they get their beef? They wouldn't go to the grocery store and get it. They wouldn't go and get it from one of the big, like somebody that lived in Wichita wouldn't necessarily get their meat from a packing house in Chicago. Like, that would have to be more local.
Mhm.
So I don't know. It bears more research, I think. And it's something else I want to say while I'm thinking about it is about the cattle feeding industry. And I wish I could remember where I heard this, but it was about a month ago. I heard this that the automobile did quite a bit to enable the cattle feeding industry. So when they started introducing automobiles about 100 years ago, like, and that was such a rapid transition. Before we got automobiles, everything was horse and buggy, right?
Mhm.
Everything was horse and buggy. You imagine how many acres of high quality feed we had to grow to feed all of those horses.
Mhm.
So then in the span of 10 years, that feeding industry isn't needed anymore because we take all the horses off the road and we replace them with cars. So there's a lot of cheap, high quality feed that people have been growing to feed horses.
Mhm.
Now, what do we do with that? Cows.
Right.
So, and this is something else that bears some more research and study, obviously. Um, so kind of in my mind, the way that goes is, around 1920, okay, we got all this good high quality feed. We're going to start feeding it to cows. So we start feeding it to cows, and somewhere along the line, we kind of discover cows will eat about anything. So feed quality kind of continues to drop. Then we end up where we are in the late 70s, early 80s, where beef quality is not that great. Consumer demand is kind of falling. And I can kind of understand why. Um, then we get some standardization, some consolidation, expansion of crop insurance programs for corn, and we're feeding all the corn and soybeans. And now, yeah, we've turned our meat products around in the last, was it 50 years? but has it been worth it?
Yeah.
Has it, is it worth it?
Is progress always worth it? And something I think about is how long does progress last? Uh, and I'm talking about a more small view progress, for instance, this cattle feeding deal. Just because we're here today and we did something for the last 50 years doesn't mean that it's a race the way we did it for 500 years. And this might just be a blip in the timeline. We're doing it this way because the conditions provide for it. Just because it seems so much more efficient to have, one farmer farming 15,000 acres versus everyone on 80 acres farming what they need. It seems more efficient, but is it, something we're brainwashed with through FFA and 4-H is that we're 1% and we have to feed the entire world. We got to feed the other 99%. And then people will say when they see, oh yeah, that's cool how you're doing that with the farmers markets and grass-fed beef, but you'll never feed the world that way. And the reply is, well, I'm not trying to feed the world. I'm trying to feed my community, my family, and my community. That started out, back when I was just trying to have beef in the freezer, eggs and raw milk so I could hit my workout goals and my gains that I was trying to have. So it started out just me trying to feed me. And then it goes to my family and my community. So, one thing I noticed with the farmers market culture and the people I meet, there's a lot of people leaving the rural area and they're wanting to find their 5, 10, 60 acres and provide something for their family. Maybe it's chicken and eggs. Maybe it's a cow or two, pigs. But I'm really seeing an upswell in that. And I think it's going to go back that way. To what degree, I don't know, but, I believe it will. And I don't know if industrial ag will ever go away, but I don't think it's going to be as prolific in the future as it has been or as we think it will be.
I There's a lot there, and I talked about it often about feeding the world.
Hmm.
And Will Harris said it best. So I'm not trying to say, I don't want to save the world. I just want to save white oak pastures. I apologize for the horrible Georgia accent, but I really I love Will Harris and I love that attitude. Like, we can't save the world. We can't feed the world. Like, let's just try to maybe feed our family first and then try to feed our community second.
Well, that's that
And
compassionate selfishness, like Ayn Rand wrote about. It's the best way to take care of your community and people around you is to take care of yourself first. At least that way, no one else has to take care of you. And then once you have the surplus and you've got yourself taken care of, you can now take care of other people. I'm not saying whether that's right or wrong. I think there's a little much of that in the world, but in agriculture, there needs to be more of that for sure, I'd say.
it would be nice to be able to produce as much as I can, keep what I need, and give away the surplus without being taxed on it.
Right.
You know, use the surplus of my production to feed my community, but not have to pay tax on that. Then
Hmm.
that's different conversation. Where I was going is, you know, you put a lot of your own food on the table. We try to put a lot of our own food on the table here in this house.
Hmm.
And the attitude that I'd like to see people have is, especially like the BTO, big time operator farmers that are, farming 5, 10,000 acres of corn. Stop telling me you're feeding the world. You're
Yeah.
feeding an ethanol plant somewhere so they can feed cows dried distillers grains.
Yeah.
You know, it,
No one's sitting down to a dinner plate of yellow dent corn
right. And nobody
or
sits
red
down
hard winter wheat.
or soybeans, right?
Yeah.
Nobody sits down to plates of those. I I can give the wheat farmers a pass because almost all the wheat grown ends up as a human edible product. I can
Okay.
almost give that a pass.
Sure.
Soybeans, I kind of have a hard time with because what is it, like 40% of our soybeans go overseas. Most of them go to hog and chicken feed, and what doesn't go there
Yeah.
goes to the ethanol plant.
It
Corn,
does hard. Go ahead.
and with corn, it's the same way. Like there's basically two users of dent corn: ethanol
Mm-hmm.
and feedlots.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you're growing alfalfa, corn, soybeans, sorghum hay, and you're cutting that all down to ship it to the Texas Panhandle to feed cows standing in a feedlot, you're not feeding the world. You're feeding the corporate coffers of Tyson, JBS, Smithfield, Marfrig,
Mm-hmm.
all the big players that have the protein industry consolidated.
Yeah. I've got a neighbor that's got 700 acres of hay grazer planted there around me. And, man, it's big. He's got a lot of it bought, or a lot of it planted, a lot of it cut down, baling it. And, he was telling me about it. And I said, hey, wrapping bales. And I said, can I get a few of those set in to my, lot there to feed some cows that I brought in that maybe are going to butcher next week or something. I don't want to turn them out, risk not catching them again. And he said, oh, Austin, I'm sorry. All that's sold before I even cut it. He takes it all out to a feedlot out west. But that's a lot of hay. And that's a big part of anyone's operation. 700 acres of sorghum Sudan grass is a lot, or not sorghum Sudan grass, but hay grazer. That's a lot of feed.
A lot of tons to the acre.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of wish I could grow that with grass, but
Yeah. Yeah.
But then again, yeah, it's cool that they can raise 4, 5, 6,000 pounds to the acre of biomass and be able to harvest that, and move it for cows.
Mm-hmm.
What are we taking off? What are we not leaving there? And what are we depriving that system of for next year's growth?
Yeah.
I cut some prairie hay 4 years ago now off the ranch. I had guy wanted to come cut some prairie hay. It's up there around the quarry. Can't really graze it. Yeah, let's go ahead. Let's go ahead and mow that off, because now I still have like I think 12 or 13 bales up there that I'm going to go spread on a hill that they've reclaimed and recontoured this winter, just to get some more ground cover before I turn cows in there. But it took 3 years before the plants where we had run the swather, before the grass came back the same height as where we hadn't. I mean, and every year it comes back a little bit thicker, comes back a little bit taller. And now the 4th year, I can't tell 3 years. I can't tell where we cut the hay 4 years ago than I could last year. So even in a native range system, it can tolerate, haying.
Mm-hmm.
But I probably wouldn't more than once every 4 years. And just because I see how much that sets the system back.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder, like with corn and soybeans, I hate to keep picking on all you corn and soybean farmers. How much fertility are you putting on the soil? How much fertility are you hauling off the soil? And how much fertility is locked up in your soil because it's bound up by another mineral or something else that's out of balance.
Yeah. Yeah. All that tonnage, whether it's corn, wheat, hay grazer that comes off, that came out of your soil, and it's got to go back in. And as I'm messing around with revitalizing these conventionally farmed fields that my family leased out to conventional neighboring farmers forever, the advice I get from all my neighbors is, Austin, you're going to have to put fertilizer on that. Well, it doesn't matter if we get rain, and it doesn't matter what your seeding rate is. You're going to have to put fertilizer on that. And so I'm thinking, is that grain kind of like that big black Angus cow out there in the pasture? If that grain needs all these inputs to grow, that might be not the thing for me to grow for forage for my cows. But that goes back into what I was talking about when we first started, was that, that first crop that I planted, cereal rye, cover crop for grazing, didn't come up at all. It was super compact soil. I dissed it, and it was low fertility. But I'm like, well, I got to plant something out there that's going to keep the cows out there long enough to change the fertility of that soil. Where I went with the sorghum Sudan, and it didn't get real tall, but it's produced enough forage that, man, those cows have been out there for the last 2 weeks, and we've got, manure in every square yard of it, almost every two yards. If you made a 2-yard box, there'd be a manure plot splat in that. And then I figure it's about the same for frequency of urine spots throughout that pasture. So that's an experiment I'm doing. Before I'll plant wheat there this winter, probably in the next month. So I'll disc that and get some soil samples and see if that fertility of that field changed at all from the animal impact.
You disc it to terminate the crop, terminate what's there. Why would you do that versus, say, like a roller crimper and then try to no-till plant into that?
So I had my neighbor disc it this last time because it was too compact. When the guy got done farming it, that had it before, took the wheat crop off. Then it baked in the sunshine in June and July and August. Then he came back in. He cut hay straw and crabgrass crop off of it, baled that all up. Then came in with skid steers, tractors, semi trailers, loaded all that hay up, took it off. So he took all the organic matter out, took all the nutrients out, and compacted it super tight. So we just did that last time to loosen it up and to make sure we can get to some soil moisture. I don't know that I'll disc it again. I really like how it came up because we got down to that soil moisture, but I'll probably no-till drill if I find the right planter into the sorghum Sudan grass, because I'd really like to lock the cows off that here this week. Hopefully we get some rains. I'd really like to see it produce a little bit of a seed head and then no-till wheat into it for winter grazing. And I'm hoping to draw some wildlife with the seed head that's left on that sorghum Sudan grass. So no, I probably wouldn't I don't want to terminate anything. That's something everyone I talk to about planting for me, they're like, well, probably ought to run out there and spray it and burn that down. I'd say no. And they'd lose interest in planting for me because they're just like, well, you got to spray it. No, we're not going to do that.
Because they want to make money spraying it too.
Yeah. Yeah. And then just people thinking, they don't think that. Well, that's what I run into is everyone in our circle thinks like we do. And then we learn certain neighbors or outside of our circle, we don't talk about this different stuff we're doing.
Yep.
And so, I kind of learned, like, that guy that was going to plant for me that wanted to spray. And I said, well, I'd like to plant these 2 different species for cover crops. And he's like, well, they won't fit through my drill. And then he said, well, I need to come out there and spray it and burn that down. And then I called him back and he didn't answer. And I said, okay, I'll just let him go because I don't think he's too interested in doing anything outside of what he's typically doing. And you can't blame people for that, but that goes back to why it was hard for me finding customers on the custom grazing deal. They're saying, well, they'd come down and, where are my cows at? Well, I moved them to this other pasture a mile down the road. Well, why'd you move them? Well, because I'm rotating my pastures. And this is 10 years ago now.
Yeah.
Maybe more people are starting to figure that out, but the electric fence, the moving them, moving them while there's still grass left. And well, I paid for that grass. How come you're not letting them graze that? How come you moved them? That type of deal. I just didn't find a customer that was up for it. It sounds like you have, or your customers have seen what you're doing work enough. And I think I'll find that customer, because there's a limit to how much effort I want to put into the direct marketing. I'm not trying to ship. There probably will be a shipping aspect of what I do, because I get asked every weekend if I can ship. I think it was Will Harris stopped shipping nationwide and just started focusing on his community. This is interesting. Between Wichita, which is an hour 20 from me,
Yep.
Oklahoma City is an hour 20 south, and Tulsa is an hour 20 southeast. Within that triangle, there's more people than every city besides New York City and LA within an hour 20. And success for me really started to add up when I started being willing to drive that hour 20. And I think about, a lot of people think their opportunity is out there and away. And I'm not saying there's anything against people that can go seek opportunity away from home. I was blessed with a small acreage and a ranch here. But I think if people, and Ponca City is more populous than out where you are, Medicine Lodge. And,
Yeah.
So that's not everywhere. It's not for everyone, but I'm trying to focus more on that. And so how much beef I sell, how many markets I want to do every Saturday, I'm almost there with my max. And then I still want to ranch. I still want to grow. I still want to be horseback every day. And so I think to tie that back in, I think a custom grazing will be an aspect to my operation, but it's waiting for the right conditions and the right partner.
Can you talk a little bit about some of the economics of grazing planted forages versus grazing native range?
I don't know them. I'm just shooting from my head.
Where I was gonna try to get you to go with that is, what kind of stocking rate can you get on native range where you're at versus what kind of stocking rate can you get out of planted forage?
So typically the stocking rate around here for cow calf annual grazing rate is like a cow to every 7 to 10 acres. I've got a Coriani cow that consumes a third less and consumes and weighs a third less than those commercial cows. So I probably figure stocking rate of 5 cows per acre. And then, to be honest, my cow herd hasn't grown to meet the size of the acreage I have leased. So when I was in the custom cattle deal and I'd leased up 2,500, 3,000 acres, to fill for those customers that were sending me cattle, when I quit taking cattle in, I held on to those leases, and my cow herd hasn't grown quite that big yet. So I've got plenty of grass and don't really have to worry about stocking rate. But I think on wheat pasture, they always figure a cow to every 2 acres or a unit to every 1.5 or 2 acres. And then on the sorghum sedan, that neighbor of mine that's growing hay grazer that was 7 foot tall, I told him it was, made calf height. And what people told me is you better get the cattle turned out there on it, or it's going to get away from you, and you probably don't have enough cows to knock it down. So I went ahead and turned in on it, and they're thinning it out, which is fine. Cause like I said, I want a no-till winter forage in there, but.
Okay. Well, that's good stuff. Let's see what's motivating you to get out of bed right now? What are the last couple books you read?
The last book I finished was, I'm going to combine 2 titles here on accident. Hold on.
That'll happen. Sometimes I get them a little confused too.
So I started reading Killers of the Flower Moon,
Okay.
but the last book I finished was Summer of the Comanche Moon,
Empire of the Summer Moon.
Empire of the Summer Moon. Yeah, that was a great book. I cried a little bit at the end of it. Uh, yeah, that was great. And then also just our history here, um, of the Southern Plains. And my family got here during the cattle drives, and when the cattle companies had the Cherokee Strip leased up, would have been past the Indian Wars, but you know how that
Like
went apart.
1880s, 1890s.
Yeah, 1880s, and then my dad's side on the 1880s, and the cattle drives and cattle companies and Cherokee Strip Cowpunchers Association, and then my mom's family got to Oklahoma in 1893 for the land run. But to read the history of the Native Americans in the Southern Plains, to see how that tied in, that I think Charles Goodnight was actually in the party that kidnapped Quanah Parker's, that captured Quanah Parker's mom, Cynthia Ann Parker, just brought that all into focus on how our history is tied here in the Southern Plains.
You know what? You mentioned that, and I was just thinking just for a second about Charles Goodnight and just that period that he was around, the late 1800s, what he saw. I mean, by the time that JA Ranch was established, I mean, it was established in Palo Duro Canyon only after we managed to run the Comanches out.
Mm-hmm.
Established that ranch, and as part of the Chisholm Trail. The Chisholm Trail kind of started in Palo Duro Canyon and went north.
Mm-hmm.
And then the way Charles Goodnight was kind of involved a little bit, kind of in the late stage of his life, saving the bison. Like,
I didn't know about that.
yeah, he was one of the guys that think in the late 1880s kind of noticed, hey, all these brown things that we used to have everywhere, they're kind of gone. Maybe we ought to
Mm-hmm.
go see if there's any left and gather them up to make sure that we still have them in the future. So Charles
Mm-hmm.
Goodnight was one of the guys that actually helped save the bison. And I was just thinking about, that wasn't that long of a time period. That was like 40, it was like a 40-year span, Austin.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm 46. Like, and it, just to think about that much change during Charles Goodnight's life
Yeah.
and what he experienced. And, then I think about some of the things that we've experienced, in our roughly shared 40 years on this planet.
Mm-hmm.
Smartphones, who saw that one coming?
Right.
I mean, 20 years ago, if you told me someday you'll be able to walk around with a supercomputer in your pocket with an ultra high resolution screen that will connect you to literally every other person on the planet and all of humanity's shared information, all
Mm-hmm.
on a supercomputer you carry around in your pocket. That
Mm-hmm.
would have blown my mind 20 years ago, but we take it for granted now.
Well, my grandma died 2 years ago now, and at the end of her life, she was able to FaceTime everyone in her family on a smartphone. So talk like we're talking here. But when she was a little girl at a dirt floor house, and she told me they would take bricks out of the fire, wrap it in a blanket, and put it in the foot of their bed to keep them warm at night. So to see that change in one lifetime, is that the times we're living in, or are there drastic changes like that in every generation?
I think there's drastic changes like that in every generation.
I'd say so.
And, I thought about this. I've thought about this quite a bit. And generations change because of a major technological development, And when that technology like becomes mass adopted, that's a change in culture.
Mm-hmm.
So when we were growing up, it was the computer.
Mm-hmm.
And the next one was the internet. And the latest one has been the smartphone. So for those of us that were born between say 1976 and 1982, there's kind of like a half generation there
Mm-hmm.
that we got computers while we were growing up.
Mm-hmm.
The kids that are born after fucking kids, the middle-aged folks that were born between say after 1982,
Mm-hmm.
they had computers in school from day one.
Yeah.
The people born in 1976 never had computers in school.
Mm.
The
Right.
pe- and then the people born after 2000, they've always had the internet.
Yeah.
And all the people born since 2010 have had smartphones.
Yeah. I graduated high school in 2006, and starting out, we couldn't have cell phones in school. And then it got to where we could have them, but we had to leave them in our locker. And then, you know, my sister teaches, and this was the year, or this upcoming year, no cell phones at all, because it got so prolific. Kids had them in their hand every day of every class. And the teachers just threw their hands up because they didn't know how to deal with it. And so to see that change, no cell phones, no cell phones allowed. You can have them, but you can have them in your locker. Everyone has it all day, every day. Now you can't have them at all.
It's interesting how we have to continue to adapt, and how we're continuing to learn about these technologies and when they're appropriate, when they should be. I mean, look, I'll freely admit I spend way too much time staring at my phone, doom scrolling, being not productive. Like, and that's what it's there. Like, that's not what it's there for, but that's what they've designed it to do. They've designed it to capture your attention so they can throw ads in front of you. I
Mm-hmm.
get it. I get it. I'm trying to wean myself off those devices. Uh, it's just, it's interesting how much and how fast society can change with the introduction of new technology and the control of the flow of information.
Mm-hmm.
This is what I was getting at. Um, tell me about climbing wind turbines.
It's a lot of fun. Um, I don't have, so I did that for shoot, 2 years, or really just one project. They built a wind farm out here in my community, a couple towers on our ranch. And yeah, so I signed up, like, there was going to be work here. And at the time, I was living on my camper in my pasture, and looked like that winter I was probably going to be chopping firewood and trying to sell raw milk to make money.
Hate
So when they
wrapping up hot rocks in blankets, putting the foot in bed to stay warm.
yeah, going out in the snow every other night to dump gasoline into my generator because it'd run out in the middle of the night. My dog would wake me up because he was cold. Yeah. So I was like, hey, I've done some heavy duty construction before. I built power lines. And I said, you think you'd use me on the wind farm? And they gave me a job, and we did the civil engineering, built roads into all the properties, excavated all the foundation holes, which is where we're at, all bedrock. I guess it's all bedrock everywhere once you get down so far. Did that. And then I built the transmission line, and then they came in with the towers, and we started putting towers together. And at that point, I got hired on by the owner of the project as a wind tech. And so after my training, they sent me out to do the mechanical walk down and commissioning of all the towers, oversaw that project. And it was cool to get up there on top of these wind towers and look out and see my ranch, my neighbors' farms and ranches. And yeah,
I bet you really get a good sense of perspective when you're on top of one of those things and can just sit there and hang out for a while.
for sure. For sure. It's
What
fun. It's cool.
So, first question I want to ask is A, you're a landowner. B,
Hmm.
you've got wind turbines on your land. C, you helped build the bloody things.
Hmm.
So, my question is, knowing what you know now and being through that experience, if you had a piece of land that didn't have a wind turbine on and somebody knocked on your door and said, Mr. Blendon, I want to build a wind farm on your property,
Hmm.
what would you say?
If it was with Duke Energy, I would say absolutely no. If it
Okay.
was with another company, because they can't, they lie to you every stage of the process, and they tell you they're going to do this, they're going to do that, and they don't do any of it. We've got areas where our towers are, the tower sites. They were going to come in, hey, whatever you want planted there, if you want it back to native pasture, we'll plant it. If you want alfalfa planted there, we'll plant it for you. It's been 5 years and nothing's been planted. Um, it's just dirt and weeds. So that's very frustrating. If I was the sole owner of the property, I was the one person getting paid the entire amount. Yeah, I'd probably do it. Um, our family land is owned by a trust now, and there's 4 beneficiaries, so that money gets split up 4 ways, and it's not enough for the hassle
Okay.
to have it out there. Then again, depending on do you have wind towers on your place?
No, I don't. It was about, I want to say it was like around 2008. The power company was out here doing surveys. Um, wind farm companies were around and they wanted to site, they were looking where they were going to put these wind farms. They were looking where they wanted to put the big power line that they got built to move the power
Hmm.
out. And we met with a gentleman named Brad Lovelace, and he worked for the power utility at the time. And my first question to the guy that introduced us was, "What's a Brad Lovelace?" And the answer was, "Brad is a friend, even though he works for the enemy. Just tell him everything you're concerned about and trust him to do the right thing."
Hmm.
So that was how I was introduced to Brad Lovelace. So we spent I think my dad and I spent a day or two with him. We touring around the area, just talking about, resource concerns and habitat concerns. And it came back that this was also kind of around the time that they're like going to list the lesser prairie chicken on a threatened species list,
Hmm.
which we did get done. And I say we, which is kind of like I didn't have anything to do with that, but that got done, which was a good thing, I think, because
Hmm.
the lesser prairie chicken's a cool bird and it's been driven out of its prime habitat because it's all been farmed up and covered up with wind turbines now. So it's
Right.
been driven out of its prime habitat into these marginal areas we still have left. And we kind of said there's not going to be any wind turbines out here because of the prairie chickens, and there's not going to be any power lines out here because of the prairie chicken.
Hmm.
Power line got
The
moved in.
overhead predator threat is what they see the power lines and the towers as an overhead threat. The birds, from the birds' perspective, is that right?
Yeah, whether they actually see it as a threat or not, I don't really know. I know that they don't like horizon breaks within a quarter of a mile.
Hmm.
Like
Okay.
power line, like a normal low voltage power line, they can be pretty tolerant of. They're fairly tolerant of oil field, like pumping units and tank
Hmm.
batteries and that kind of thing. Um, they don't seem to like communications towers, like a 400, like 250-foot cell phone tower. They
Hmm.
don't seem to like those a whole lot. Um, but if there's a cedar tree within a quarter mile, they're gone. Like if they
Hmm.
can see a cedar tree on the horizon, they don't.
Would you say that's typical with quail species, or is that particular to the lesser prairie chicken?
I think that's pretty particular lesser prairie chicken. Quail don't give a crap. I mean,
Hmm.
the 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 more variability you have in your pasture, like if you have an area that's a little overgrazed, a little hammered, area that's sodded up, and then you got 7 foot tall big blue stem and sagebrush,
Hmm.
all right in a all right in a tiny little area. you're going to have quail. Man, I have seen some of the biggest coveys of quail in the last 2 weeks that I've ever seen. There was a covey got up like 3 days ago that had to have been 30, 35 birds. Just,
Oh, wow.
yeah, just
I think it's
nuts.
a great year for it's been a good year for them.
Yes. Yes, it has. Yes. Yes, it has. But yeah, I think the quail are a really neat bird. But anyway, so that's why that's the long end. That's the long story. We don't have wind
Mhm.
turbines. We don't have power lines here because
Mhm.
critical habitat for lesser prairie chicken. Okay, there's some, and I get that, that there's money involved in siting those wind turbines. There's money involved in siting that transmission line, and that's
Mhm.
okay. There's also money involved in maintaining habitat for threatened grassland birds. I mean,
Right.
there's money available for that. Nobody's going to knock on your door and offer to give you that. You got to go down to the NRCS office and talk to them
Mhm.
about that one.
Mhm.
Um, I, I do want to back up. We were talking about wind farms. The other thing I
Mhm.
kind of want to know is, after you've seen what it takes to build them and the infrastructure that is basically buried into the ground, that's permanent.
Mhm.
Like when they come decommission a wind farm, they'll take the towers out, right? Because
Mhm.
that's all steel that can be recycled. They're not going to take the concrete out. They're not going to take that.
No.
They're not going to pull that, several hundred tons of material out of the foundation of the base of that tower and haul that off. They're not going to pull all their power lines out of the ground. They're not going to peel up their roads and rework that soil and recontour that, are they?
No.
So
Have you seen any decommissioned wind farms
I
yet?
haven't. I haven't. And that's I think that's the other thing that's missing in this conversation is, yes, people are, they do have some reservations about, you know, about those big power lines being in the ground forever, about that concrete being in the ground forever, even if the wind turbine is gone. And maybe the argument is, even though that wind tower might only have a design life of, 10, 15, 20 years, they could always put something else on that base. And they could always use those, like, giant cables they bury in the ground to move the power inside the wind farm. Those could also be used for something else. What? I don't
Mhm.
know, but I suppose that argument could be made as well.
Mhm.
Me as a landowner, if you want to come out and build something and you're going to say we're only going to be here for 40 years, you're going to take that damn concrete with you when you leave.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
unless the entire wind farm is on your property, you almost have no negotiating power.
Right.
So,
I would say if your neighbors are close enough that you're going to be looking at the wind towers anyways, really consider having them on your place so you can have the same chance at money that your neighbors are going to have. Because it's all about competition anyways, right? Especially where there's smaller landholders. If you've got enough acreage to where the other towers are going to be far enough, you don't mind looking at them, or you don't have to deal with them or think about them, then tell them no. If I look at the oil industry in Oklahoma as an idea of what these wind farms might look like when they're done, they're not going to take anything out of here. Because I've never seen anyone clean up oil wells. We live on the oldest oil field in Oklahoma. My great great grandpa drilled the first gas well by hand in 1893. He was drilling a water well, hit natural gas at 93 feet. The well's still there. He stacked rock around it, got this big around, like my shoulders wouldn't even fit in there. And somehow those people worked that hard, hit natural gas instead of water, and it blew his hat and his tools up out of the hole. So that was the first natural gas well. And then they drilled the first commercial oil well there. And so,
I take
a
it he
hundred,
was not a smoker.
in fact, he wasn't smoking at that time anyways. They, uh, they put a board They drilled holes in a board and put over the well, mudded it over, and piped that natural gas into the house to heat with that winter in 1893. So, but all that was, I'm kind of proud of that history, but all that to say, we've got 130 years of oil production on our land and in our community, and none of it's ever been cleaned up. And the state corporation commission that's supposed to regulate oil and gas, they're not making anyone clean anything up. Attorneys in Oklahoma will not talk to you if you need to sue or need anything done against an oil and gas company, be it a small time mom and pop oil company or ConocoPhillips. The laws are just structured to where you won't get anything done, and you don't have enough money to fight it.
It's
So
unfortunate.
I don't see wind farm being any different. I imagine they'll stop spinning one day, and the company that we have the contract with will probably have changed, morphed into another company, sold to another company, and they won't have any liability.
That liability shell game with the operating companies, that's a fun one.
Mm.
But I have to leave that one for another time. We got to start moving out of here.
Cool.
Where can people find you at Farmers Market to get your beef? Where can they get a hold of you on the internet if they want to know more? Website, social media, all the good stuff.
On the internet, biggrassbeef.com. On Instagram, biggrassbeef. Facebook, biggrassbeef. And then on Saturday mornings, the Tulsa Farmers Market, the Scissortail Park Farmers Market in Oklahoma City, and the Broken Arrow Rose District Market in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma.
All right. Anything you want to leave us with?
Nope.
All right, man. Well,
That's it. I appreciate it.
I really appreciate your time today, and thanks for doing this. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. Take care.
All right, gang. Have a great week. We'll see you on the other side. Hey there. Thanks for making it all the way to the end. I appreciate you. I hate to ask, but since you're already here, to just take a moment to make sure you're following me on social media. You can find me on all social media platforms as Red Hills Rancher. Show some love to the show supporters listed in the show notes. Leave a review or share this podcast with your friends and networks if it resonated with you. I'll be back next week with another episode to reboot your thinking about farming, ranching, food systems, and the people that operate them. Have a great week, gang. We'll see you.